My sister couldn't handle my weight loss, so she tried to humiliate me at her wedding. But this time, I fought back. I'm 32. I grew up with the belief that family was supposed to be your safe haven, your refuge from the world. But over the years, I learned the hard way that not all families work like that, and sometimes the people closest to you can hurt you the most. It all started back in my childhood. I was always the fat one in my family, the one who stood out for all the wrong reasons. From the moment I entered kindergarten, I realized that my size set me apart from the other kids. As I grew older, it became even more glaring. By the time I hit middle school, there was no denying it. I was overweight, and it was a constant source of embarrassment. The teasing started early. Kids in school would call me names, make cruel jokes, and exclude me from social activities. I wasn't invited to birthday parties, and I wasn't picked for any sports teams. I became a target, and it was the hardest thing to endure. I tried to block it out, to find solace in other things. I turned to books. Books were my escape. They allowed me to live in worlds where I didn't have to worry about being judged or made fun of. Despite the bullying, I excelled in academics. I became known as the nerdy girl, and while that didn't solve everything, it did give me something to cling to. I earned good grades, and my parents were always proud of that. But deep down, it felt like no matter what I did, it wasn't enough. My younger sister, Bonnie, was the opposite of me. She was always the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. She was popular, outgoing, and loved by everyone. Everyone, that is, except for me. Growing up, Bonnie had everything handed to her. She was a natural beauty, the kind of person who could walk into any room and instantly become the center of attention. I, on the other hand, always felt like I was just trying to keep up like I didn't belong. But I loved her. She was my sister, and no matter how different we were, I always tried to protect her. I thought that, eventually, we'd become closer. But as we grew older, things started to change. The contrast between us was stark, and something my family never let me forget. Bonnie was the sunshine, the social butterfly who could light up any room. I was the shadow, the awkward one who couldn't seem to fit in anywhere, literally and figuratively. School was a battlefield. Kids can be cruel, but Bonnie's friends were especially vicious. They'd make oinking sounds when I walked past, leave notes in my locker about weight loss programs, and once even staged a mock intervention about my eating problem in the cafeteria. And Bonnie? She didn't just stand by. She led the charge, her musical laugh echoing through the hallways as I fought back tears. My parents' response to the bullying was perhaps even more painful than the torment itself. "They're just kids being kids," my mother would say, barely looking up from her magazine. "Maybe if you lost some weight, they wouldn't have anything to tease you about." My father would simply shake his head and mutter something about how I should be more like my sister. While Bonnie was collecting popularity votes and prom queen crowns, I was collecting straight A's and academic awards. It was the one area where I could shine, where my size didn't matter. But even this victory was tainted by my family's reaction. "It's good that you're smart," my mother would say, "because with your looks..." She never finished that sentence. She didn't have to. One night during my senior year, Bonnie came home drunk and confessed something that shook me to my core. She had been systematically sabotaging my schoolwork for years, stealing assignments, deleting files from my computer, even convincing teachers that I had cheated. "I couldn't let you have anything," she slurred, laughing as if it was all some grand joke. "You were already the smart one. I had to keep you in your place." College was my escape. I moved as far away as I could, building a new life where no one knew me as Bonnie's fat sister. I made friends who valued me for my mind, my humor, my loyalty. But the wounds from my childhood still festered. The night Bonnie posted yet another backhanded comment on my Facebook photo, something inside me snapped. I was done letting her voice dictate how I felt about myself. This wasn't about proving anything to her or our parents. This was about me finally taking control of my life. I started small, joining a gym, learning to cook healthy meals, working with a nutritionist. The physical changes came gradually, but it was the mental transformation that really changed everything. My therapist helped me understand how years of Bonnie's loving concern and our parents' constant comparisons had shaped my self-worth. As my confidence grew, so did my boldness. I dyed my mousy brown hair striking blonde, replaced my shapeless clothes with outfits that made me feel powerful, and finally started seeing myself as someone worthy of taking up space in the world. Then came the group text. She said yes. Of course, she would be the first to get married. And of course our parents would spend the next hour in the family group chat gushing about their baby girl's perfect moment. When she called to personally invite me to the wedding, I could hear that familiar sweetness in her voice, the tone that always preceded a knife to the heart. "I just worry about you," she sighed, like she was carrying some great burden. "You're not getting any younger, and with your situation, well, you don't want to end up alone, do you?" I almost laughed. 6 months ago, those words would have sent me into a spiral. Now, they rolled right off my back. Bonnie was still playing the same old games, but I wasn't the same player anymore. 2 weeks before Bonnie's wedding, my family insisted I fly home for a final planning lunch. I walked into my parents' house a different person, not just physically, but in every way that mattered. The shock on their faces was almost comical. My mother's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. My father blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear his vision. But it was Bonnie's reaction that really told the story. She walked right past me at first, not recognizing her own sister. When realization dawned, her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, disbelief, and finally, something that looked a lot like fear. "Sister, is that really you?" The lunch that followed was a masterclass in passive-aggressive behavior. Bonnie kept poking at my stomach, as if checking for padding. My mother couldn't stop making backhanded compliments. "You look so different, almost too different. Maybe you should tone it down for the wedding." The suggestion that I dye my hair back to brown was the last straw. "Why?" I asked, my voice steady. "Does Bonnie own the rights to being blonde?" That's when it all exploded. My family revealed their true colors, suggesting I was trying to overshadow the bride, that I was being selfish, that I should make myself less noticeable for Bonnie's big day. The wedding day itself was a study in controlled chaos. I arrived looking my best, not to overshadow anyone, but because I had finally learned to value myself. The whispers and double takes from relatives who hadn't seen me since my transformation were satisfying, I'll admit. But then came Bonnie's wedding toast. She stood there in her perfect white dress, champagne glass in hand, and decided to take one final shot at her big sister. "I want to thank my formerly fat sister," she announced to the room, her voice carrying that familiar mocking tone, "who worked so hard to fit into this wedding." Literally, the room filled with uncomfortable laughter. Something in me shifted. Years of taking the high road, of staying quiet, of being the bigger person, all of it evaporated in that moment. I stood up, walked to the microphone, and took it from her hand. "Thank you, Bonnie, for that touching tribute," I said, my voice clear and strong. "You know, folks, my sister has always had a special way of making people feel included. When we were kids, she would organize special interventions about my weight in the school cafeteria. She would steal my homework and sabotage my projects because she couldn't stand that I was smarter than her. And now, on her wedding day, she's showing that same thoughtful attention to detail." I turned to her fiancé, who was watching with growing concern. "I hope you know what you're getting into. My sister doesn't just marry for love. She marries for status, for appearance, for whatever she thinks will make her look better than everyone else. Just like she's spent her entire life trying to make me feel smaller to make herself feel bigger." The silence in the room was deafening. I set the microphone down gently, picked up my purse, and walked out with my head held high. Behind me, I could hear the murmurs starting, the chaos beginning to unfold. The fallout was nuclear. My phone exploded with messages, Some family members condemning me for ruining Bonnie's wedding, others quietly congratulating me for finally standing up for myself. My parents left voicemails demanding I return and apologize. Bonnie sent a series of increasingly hysterical texts about how I had destroyed her perfect day. But the most interesting development came 3 days later. Bonnie's fiancé called off the wedding. My speech had apparently made him start asking questions about Bonnie's past behavior, and he didn't like the answers he found. Several of our old schoolmates came forward with stories about how Bonnie had treated me, and the pattern of manipulation became clear. My parents were furious, of course. They blamed me for poisoning Bonnie's relationship, for turning family members against her, for everything except their own role in enabling her behavior for all these years. Some relatives sided with them, claiming I was jealous and had deliberately sabotaged my sister's happiness. But others, particularly those who had witnessed the years of abuse, stood firmly in my corner. My aunt, who had always been kind to me, finally spoke up about how she had watched me suffer under Bonnie's cruelty and our parents' neglect. I blocked their numbers eventually. All of them, Bonnie, my parents, the relatives who couldn't see past their own prejudices. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The constant stream of guilt and manipulation had to stop if I was ever going to heal. The freedom that came with that decision was incredible. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living under the shadow of their expectations or criticism. I could just be me, not the fat sister, not the smart one, not the one who needed to dim her light to make others comfortable. Just me. I threw myself into my career, excelling in ways I never had before because I wasn't constantly second-guessing myself. I started dating, meeting people who appreciated me for who I was, not what I looked like. I even started a support group for others who had experienced family bullying, turning my pain into purpose. 6 months after the wedding incident, I ran into Bonnie at a local coffee shop. She had lost weight, too much weight, and looked haunted. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old guilt, the ingrained responsibility for her happiness. But then I remembered all the years of torment, all the tears I had shed because of her cruelty. "I hope you find peace, Bonnie," I said, and walked away. Because that's the thing about toxic family relationships. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is walk away and let people face the consequences of their own actions. They say living well is the best revenge, but I've learned it's not about revenge at all. It's about reclaiming your power, your dignity, your right to exist exactly as you are. The weight I lost wasn't just physical. It was the weight of their expectations, their criticism, their constant disapproval. I still have days when I doubt myself, when the old insecurities creep back in. But then I remember that scared, overweight girl who found her strength, who stood up in front of a room full of people and finally spoke her truth. She's still part of me, but she's no longer afraid. The truth is, family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about finding people who celebrate your success instead of trying to dim your light. Who loves you not in spite of who you are, but because of it. As for Bonnie and my parents, I hear things through the grapevine occasionally. Bonnie never rescheduled her wedding. My parents are still making excuses for her behavior. But their story is no longer my story. I'm writing my own now, and in this version, I'm not the supporting character. I'm the hero of my own life. And you know what? That's the best kind of transformation there is.